This summer, I learned to listen to the rain on the kitchen window. The old house on the hill kept its own weather, as if the weather belonged to it and not to the sky. I learned that early, when the window glowed with the pale light of a late afternoon, and the lilac scent came through the screen like a rumour you could almost hear. I was a boy then, all elbows and questions, and the house was a patient thing ready to bear with all the clumsy silhouettes of growing up. My sister, Ada, and I would press our noses to the glass and pretend the rain spoke in a language of tap-taps and silver threads, and the house listened with a quiet, old heart of its own, as if it remembered every summer that ever was, even the summers we hadn't lived through yet. Ada taught me to listen to what the walls did not say aloud. In the kitchen, there was a cabinet we never opened, a place for china so fine it hardly seemed to exist in a world where dust had a border and corners held their breaths. But every so often, when the rain grew soft and the light grew thin, the cabinet doors would sigh, not open, not creak, just sigh, as though someone inside the wood had found the courage to whisper something you shouldn't hear. Ada would look at me with those earnest blue eyes that never quite belonged to a child's face anymore, and she would say the house remembered things it should have forgotten years ago. We had a ritual, odd for children, but not for a house that wore time like a shawl. Before the first storm of the season, we would take a cloth and wipe the dust from the picture in the hall, the black and white of a girl with a wide smile and eyes that looked back with a seriousness no child deserves to own. That photograph was our talisman, our invitation to the living world that must have lived in the house before we did. Ada swore the girl winked when you blinked just right. I believed the house kept her alive in its memory, like a lantern that refuses to go out even as the lamp oil runs low. Her name wasn't spoken aloud at first. Names were dangerous things in that house, especially a name attached to a photograph. They wanted you to forget, as if forgetting could shelter you from something you could not name. The girl was dubbed the absent friend, a faint, fluttering label that did not quite settle on her like a coat would. Ada and I thought the girl, Mira, she came to be known to us in occasional dreamlike pieces, was some cousin from a distant grandmother's tale, a story you heard as a bedtime whisper but could never quite believe in the daylight. We pretended nothing harmful lived there in Mira's smile. But the house knew better, and the house did not lie. Then came the summer when the storm did not end, when the rain seemed to be listening to us, as if we were the new creatures to be recorded in the house's ledger. It started with a sound, a soft, unsteady tapping from the pantry wall, where the old jars kept their suspicious weights, and the world's quiet smells of pepper and salt hung like a memory around the shelves. The tapping was not a wood knock you learned to ignore. It was a question asked of you, and it asked it in a grandmother's patience. Ada slept in the room that overlooked the lilac bushes, the night fragrance of which drifted under the door and made our shared breath seem as if it belonged to someone else. I slept in the room across the hall, with a window that faced the creek where the town's children used to play in the summer floodwater and pretend it was an ocean. It was during that storm that Mira's photograph began to change, if only by inches, as if the paper itself remembered a different year than the one printed in the corner. The girl's smile softened into something almost shy, almost sad, and the eyes, those grave, clock-like eyes, held mine a touch longer than any child's ever should. The house, which had always spoken inborn syllables of wind and scuff, began to speak in complete sentences. It was not anger or malice. Not exactly. It was a patient confession, the sort you coax out of someone who has lived with a truth so long it has learned to cradle their breath. The creak of the stairs took on a rhythm. Step, pause, like a lullaby written for someone who never slept. And in the attic, the trunk where we kept Mira's photograph, the trunk that always seemed a shade too heavy for its hinges, gave forth a sigh of its own when we approached it, as if the wood remembered opening it long ago and hearing again the soft, frightened whisper Mira used to make when she was very small, before the storm came and changed everything. Ada grew pale in a way that kept her silent for days. I learned to listen to the rain, not because the rain had a voice, but because the house did. It spoke in the manner of old people, who have learned to manage loss, like a thread they keep pulled taut between their fingers, a way to pretend the loose ends might still be tucked into something that looks like a life. The photograph shifted with the light of the storm. It did not leap out of the frame, but it loosened its edges, and Mira's face, never smiling in any way that would be comforting, always questioning, appeared a fraction older, a fraction more real, as if time outside the frame pressed against the glass until it could slip through. In the deepest hours, the house would breathe as if it had just exhaled a memory it had held too tight for too long. Ada would wake with a start, whispering that someone was in the hall, that she heard Mira's step, the soft rustle of fabric that wasn't hers to wear, a dress that belonged to someone who ought not to stand there and look at us with that same grave patience Mira wore. It was not fear that kept us quiet, but the strange relief of knowing we were not alone with a truth we had promised never to confess aloud. And then the confession found us anyway, carried by the rain when it finally slowed into a stubborn drizzle, the kind that returns in the evening with a question mark in its throat. In the pantry, behind the array of jars, the wall gave way to a space we hadn't known existed, a narrow door, scarcely more than a seam in the plaster, that opened when I pressed a palm, as if I believed a hand still rested there. Inside was a small room, a sort of memory closet, with a single chair and a dusty notebook laid upon a table, its pages bound by a ribbon of a colour Mira would have liked. Indigo, perhaps, like the deepest corner of the creek when the sun has vanished behind the clouds. The notebook had Mira's handwriting, but not Mira's voice. It spoke in a tone I recognized at once as the voice of someone who had learned to live with the truth you cannot bear to tell others. The pages catalogued what happened the summer we drifted too close to the well behind the house. A well we had always treated as a mere old well, a place where water slept and children pretended to fish for memories. Mira's entries described a pact we had made in a language only children remember, when adults forget how to listen.